So, Cyborg signed with Bellator. Now, that's obviously wasn't a big surprise after Dana White said he was just going to waive Cyborg's non-compete, where I believe the UFC had 3 months where they could exclusively negotiate with Cyborg before any other outside bidders could negotiate with her. And because of the bad play between Cyborg and the UFC. They just never saw eye to eye. Cyborg doctored, well, not Cyborg herself, I'm sure, but somebody in her camp doctored a video to and put subtitles on it and made it look like Dana White was saying something he wasn't saying. And it was just a bad look. The relationship was never good from the beginning. The way that Cyborg came into the UFC, they made her cut to 140 pounds. There was the friction between her and Ronda, and the UFC was obviously always on Ronda's side. So that relationship just never really worked. Cyborg never really fit in the UFC. The UFC never really did anything to develop a featherweight division. And in Bellator, she's not going to have that problem. In Bellator, they can get away with just having a few featherweight contenders for her to fight. In the UFC, you kind of need to develop that full top 15. When you go to the UFC's website and look at their rankings, you want to be able to see a fleshed out top 15 on that site. And it just kind of looked Bush League the whole time that Cyborg was in the UFC, because they never had that top 15 in there. It was always not applicable, or, check back later for the rankings. So the UFC, it was really just, they were using her for one-offs and stuff like that. If you're going to do that, I think Bellator is just a much more interesting place for Cyborg to be. She has the career flexibility over in Bellator to where she can... Bellator has a great relationship with Ryzen, obviously, with Kyoji Horiguchi having some crossover fights and actually being the Ryzen and Bellator bantamweight champion currently. So she can have some fun fights over in Japan. In Japan, they love Cyborg over there. And, so she can have some fun fights over there. You can see her fighting in a ring. They could have her doing kickboxing over in Ryzen. Bellator has the promotional flexibility to be able to lend her to go do a boxing match and co-promote and make a little bit of money off of her, build their brand, and have Cyborg compete in some interesting fights. So there's just a lot of interesting and different options for Cyborg when she's in Bellator. It's a multi-year, multi-fight exclusive deal. The terms of the deal aren't really clear, but Scott Coker has claimed that he believes Cyborg is going to finish her career with Bellator, and I gotta say, I love it. In the UFC, there's only one fight for Cyborg, and that's the Amanda Nunes rematch, and don't get me wrong, I would love to see it, just like everybody else would love to see it. But I think most people want Cyborg to stay in the UFC just because of that fight. But think about it. What is there for Cyborg after that? They're not going to let her do any fun cross-promotional stuff. She's not going to be able to go over to Japan and fight in a ring and compete in different sports. And in Bellator, to be honest, there's more interesting contenders for Cyborg. For example, the current featherweight champion in Bellator, Julia Budd, is a kickboxer herself, and she hasn't lost a fight in a while. She hasn't lost a fight since she lost to Ronda Rousey way back in Strikeforce, before Ronda even dropped to bantamweight. It was still a featherweight fight. And Julia Budd's only other loss in her career is to Amanda Nunes. Since then, she's been undefeated. She's looked amazing throughout her Bellator run. Cyborg has never fought Julia Budd before. I think Julia Budd is one of the only high-level women's 145-pound fighters that Cyborg hasn't faced yet. So there's a fresh matchup that's super exciting. Kat Zingano was recently released from the UFC, so Bellator can sign her. She can inflate up to a 145, and she's a big, strong girl. She can fight well at 145 pounds. That's another interesting fight. I'm not saying that that's going to be necessarily the most competitive fight. I would certainly favor Cyborg significantly in that one, but that's a fun fight between two big name girls that both move the needle, that a lot of people would be willing to tune into a Bellator event for, which is the kind of fighters that Bellator really needs. Now, in other news, Darren Till finally going up to middleweight, and in his first fight at middleweight, he's taking on Kelvin Gastelum. Now, I mean, Gastelum was also a former welterweight himself, and he's a little bit of a smaller middleweight, but I don't like this matchup particularly for Darren Till. I mean, Gastelum is a guy who just went toe-to-toe with Izzy Adesanya for 5 rounds in a fight of the year type of a fight, and he's really proven, Kelvin, that he is at the top of the heap in the middleweight division, with the fight against Jacare, Tim Kennedy, Michael Bisping. He's really proven that he is a top middleweight. So for Darren Till's first fight at middleweight to be up against a legitimate top contender, I just think it's once again getting pushed a little bit too soon. They pushed him too soon already at welterweight, and we saw how that ended for him. And Darren Till is only 26 years old. He's been in the UFC for a little while now, and he says he wants to fight till he's 35 or 36. So if you're the UFC, you've got this young guy for another decade. You don't need to fast track him in the division. Why can't he fight Ian Heinisch first? Ian Heinisch, exciting fighter, just competed recently, and he's not a guy who's going to be able to potentially put it on Till and knock him out like Masvidal did in his last one. Gastelum can knock Till out, that's for sure. Gastelum has got big power. He's got crisp striking. He has really good head movement. He knows how to lean back and then zip in with a big shot. So I would just prefer to see Till against, Uriah Hall. There's a phenomenal fight right there for Till. I'm not saying give Till a can per se. I'm not saying, but you can give him a guy who's just inside the top 15 or, just outside the top 15, somewhere in that range. Let him get his feet wet, see how he looks at the division, give him a couple of fights to work his way up. And the thing is, when you give somebody who has immense talent like Darren Till, maybe a lower ranked opponent, you're giving Till an opportunity to get an exciting knockout or something that could, an exciting knockout. It adds to your highlight reel, and it really helps catapult you forward. You put him in here with Gastelum. Let's say the worst thing happens and he gets knocked out again. I mean, that would be Woodley, Masvidal, and Gastelum. 3 L's in a row for a guy like Till, who just, a year ago was competing for the belt and, had all the hype in the world. People were talking about as the next great UK fighter. Let's build this guy up for a little bit. Let's give him. I'm not even saying give him a gimme. I'm saying give him Uriah Hall. That's not an easy fight, but that would be an extremely exciting fight. Uriah is a guy who's going to want to stand with them. It would be a fun kickboxing match, and Uriah could knock him out too. But you don't need to give him the number 3 guy in the world because let's say he beats Gastelum. I mean, where do you go from there? It's literally like a title shot is the next fight. And we already have, Cannonier and Hermanson at the top of the division. Among others, like Paulo Costa, we don't need another top contender at middleweight right now. Like I said, Hermanson and Cannonier coming up. That is going to be a fight to determine another high-level contender. I think Paulo Costa is probably in line to take on the winner of Whittaker Adesanya, assuming that nothing crazy happens there, like a draw or a controversial finish where they have to run it back. So by putting Darren Till in there, you're basically, if he wins that fight, he's only 1 fight away from a title shot, and now we've just got a jumble of contenders when, we could be building up Till maybe a little bit slower and have him peak at a time when their contenders are dwindling more so. But, I mean, there are a ton of interesting matchups for Till at middleweight. I mean, literally everybody I just named, Cannonier, Hermanson, Whittaker, Adesanya, Paulo Costa, these guys are all going to want to strike with Till, which is what he prefers to do, and it's what, the fans generally prefer to watch. So I'm really excited for Till up at middleweight. I think it's going to be a ton of fun. I think it's going to be really entertaining. But I just think that you didn't need to give him Gastelum right away. And even if he beats Gastelum, don't come at me and say that I was wrong for saying that they shouldn't have given him Gastelum, because it's not about whether you win or lose. It's about what makes sense, and you need to give people fights that make sense. And you can win a fight that doesn't make sense, just like you can win a poker hand with 2-7 offsuit against a guy who has pocket aces.